we're going to get a little bit, not technical, maybe a little bit deep this evening. I'm going to try and make this feasible for keeping our attention as we talk through it. But I was thinking about something this week because of the nature of the passage that we're reading. And here's the thing that I thought about. Sometimes a basic material description of something does not communicate or paint the clearest picture of the thing that you're saying. Sometimes we might have to dig deeper and use tools that we have and creativity to convey a real understanding of what's actually happening. So here is an example of what I'm saying. I'm going to give you two descriptions of the same event, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about. There's a young woman, and she walked down a narrow pathway. Hundreds of people were watching her. She wore a white dress. The man at the end of the walkway cried. That's description number one. Description number two is this. The bride, shining bright white like the midday sun, gracefully walked the aisle. Friends and family, the adoring fans in the gallery of her life, stood transfixed. The groom, welling up with pride, that is true, with pride, awe, and wonder, was ready to step into a new life. Now, the first thing that I read you was probably a more direct description of the events happening at a wedding when a bride walks down the aisle. The second description is a little more poetic. It uses some other liberties to explain what's happening, but I think it is a better description of what's actually happening, the purpose of the moment, the gravity of it. And you learned this in school, that communicating often requires us making comparisons, using metaphors or similes to explain the thing you're talking about. So a metaphor is using a comparison between two things and saying that one thing is another. So I'll give you an example. I could say, or you could hear someone say, my grandmother is the rock of my life. They could say something like that. Now, their grandmother is obviously not a rock, I hope not, unless you walked into their house and they had a rock saying it was their grandmother. But they're using a metaphor to say, this is what my grandmother is for me. A simile is the same thing, but it's using the word like or as. So Chevy, my Chevy is like a rock. The same idea. I don't have a Chevy, so I don't know about that. But similes and metaphors, they are useful when we communicate, and we need to use them to make things make sense. And so one of my favorite things is coming across a really good simile or metaphor that gives a good description of something where you were thinking, man, I couldn't have explained it any better myself. So I've gathered a few of these types of metaphors and similes that I want to share with you, and you'll be familiar with them. You might hear someone say something like this. Don't promote that guy. He's just an empty suit. He's just taking up space. He's not literally an empty suit, but you're giving a comparison to what he is. That presentation that I just heard was all sizzle, no steak. That's one of my favorite ones. They're trying to compensate for the lack of substance by giving pizzazz to what they're doing. I'd be careful of that guy. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's pretending to be one of you, but he's not actually. Don't let her talk in front of everyone. She's a loose cannon. Everyone knows that you have a family member that's like that. Don't let her talk when we're in public, loose cannon. The coach might say to his team, guys, we're running around out there like chickens with our heads cut off. Again, another good description, not literal, but it explains what you're doing. That guy's just a one-trick pony. He did that one thing that was impressive, and it's the only thing that he knows how to do. If you test him any farther, he won't be able to do any more. Another one, I think this is a really good one in work or in relationships. If you have a person in your life that gets angry easily, the comparison of saying, being around you feels like I'm walking on eggshells. All those are good. Now, I'm just throwing a bunch of those out there to tell you, and I think you know this from your life, a lot of times if you are trying to explain what you are feeling, especially to somebody, or what you're experiencing, it requires you using comparisons, similes, metaphors, to get at what you are trying to tell them. I've given you a definition of what I think a metaphor is or why we use it. We use metaphors and similes because in using the language of the familiar, we can communicate a reality that is not easily understood. So for us, we do that all the time. You know, that meal was terrible. That meal was the Nickelback of meals. I'm never going to that restaurant again. You know, you give a whole bunch of things where okay, there are a few of you understood. There's a whole bunch of ways that we try and explain why something is good or bad, and we have to get creative in doing it. Now, I say all of that because our passage today is filled with a bunch of consecutive metaphors and similes that Jude is using to explain his opponents to the people he's writing to. He actually uses them in a string, kind of in the way that I just did. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each one of the metaphors, and hopefully we can get to the point of understanding what Jude's overall focus is for this passage. So we're going to pick up in verse 12 of the book of Jude, and here is what he says. He says, these are the men who are hidden reefs in your love feasts when they feast with you without fear. Shepherds caring for themselves, clouds without water, carried along by winds, autumn trees without fruit, doubly dead, uprooted, wild waves of the sea, casting up their own shame like foam, wandering stars for whom the black darkness has been reserved forever. Now, Jude does not stop to give a description of what he means by any one of these. He's letting the comparisons and the metaphors stand as they are. So before we talk about all the individual metaphors that we're going to read, I do want to talk about the main point for tonight that I want to focus on. And what Jude is getting at for these particular false teachers that have crept into the church, what he's saying about them is that they have denied God's purpose and his crafting of what their lives should be, and in the process, it's led them to wickedness. So the big idea is very simple. It's a Dr. Seuss rhyme. It says this: deny God's purpose and evil works will surface. Deny God's purpose and evil works surface in your life. They come up all over the place. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. I like rhyming things together as it goes. This, you can tell the stage of life my wife and I are in right now. But when we deny the way that the Lord has created us and why he's created us a certain way, it leads into destructive patterns. Destructive works, evil works show up in our life. And so I want to take one more detour before we start talking about these particular metaphors about this idea of God's design. I came across a philosophical concept a few years ago, and it's been used throughout history. Plato and Aristotle used it. It's a fancy word. You don't have to know the word, but the concept is important. It's called teleology. And what it means is it's the use of design and purpose as an explanation for what something is. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. If you showed me a shovel and you asked me, what is this shovel? What is it? I could explain it to you in several different ways, but some person, say they were a scientist, they might be tempted to give you a physical explanation of what the shovel is. They might say it is a wooden handle with a curved piece of metal at the end of it. Or they could even get really specific. They could say it's this many molecules of cobalt in the metal and all these. They could get really specific in explaining what that shovel is. But you and I both know that the best explanation for what a shovel actually is that it is a tool designed by a human mind for a purpose of digging holes. Now, you could use the shovel for things other than its intended purpose. You could use it to hit someone over the head with it or something. Don't do that. But the actual explanation for what a shovel is not just the material that makes it up. It's its purpose that defines what it is. A human mind took this tool, fashioned it so that it would be easier to dig a hole or to dig a trench or whatever it is that you are going to do with the shovel. So teleology would say that anything in the world would be best explained by its purpose instead of just what makes up that thing. Now, I think this is actually a very important thing for us to understand now, because we live in a time of history where many people are tempted to explain things in the natural world just by the material that makes it up, especially for humans. We think about this, like when you hear that someone has some sort of aberrant behavior going on in their life, a self-destructive behavior. A lot of the way at times people will talk about it is they'll say, well, there's something wrong with their brain. There's chemicals that are imbalanced in their brain that are making them do all these different things. And the reality, though, is that we believe we are made in God's image. The better definition for what we are is not the physical nature of our body. It's the purpose that God designed and intended us with. So that has a lot of implications later for things like sexuality and how we behave and why we do the things that we do. But I think this is an important thing to note. We should know who we are, not just based on the basic physical nature of what we are, but based on the purpose of what God designed us to be. Now keep that in mind as we go in and read what these individual metaphors that Jude uses are. The first thing he says about these opponents is that they are hidden reefs at your love feast. The Greek word here is spiloi, and what it means is blemishes. He's saying these people are blemishes at your love feast where you are gathered together. Now, the word he's using, these are community meals that the early Christians would have eaten together, and during that meal, they also would have taken the Lord's Supper when they're there. So it's the time that they would spend together in community. And he's saying, by you allowing these people influence at your meals, they become a stain on your meal. They become a stain on your community. And the image that he gives, the literal translation, is this idea of a hidden reef. So I don't know if any of you have ever been at a part of the ocean where there's a reef underneath, it would be quite perilous for you to try and take a boat and paddle or sail through that part of the reef. Very quickly, your boat is going to sink. You're going to go down under. And so he's saying, if you're not careful of these people, because of what they're teaching, because of what they're modeling, it's going to sink your ship. It is a hidden reef if you are not watching for it. That is metaphor number one. Metaphor number two, he calls them, so the translation I read a second ago just says they only feed themselves. What the Greek actually says is shepherds who feed only themselves. Now, we have talked a lot about shepherds in the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, we did an entire sermon series on the psalm that talks about the Lord being my shepherd. And that metaphor of the shepherd shows up over and over and over again in the scriptures, that God is the shepherd of his people. Jesus says he is the shepherd of his people. In the New Testament, the way it describes leaders in the church, overseers and pastors, should be shepherds for their people. And the idea of what a shepherd does is that they are supposed to protect, provide stability, make it so that the sheep can be safe and secure to do what they need to do. But a shepherd has to behave selflessly. But he's saying that these are shepherds who are not doing that. They're taking advantage of their position to feed themselves. Now, the Bible in a bunch of different places has very harsh words for people who take their position and use it for personal gain or use it to the chagrin of the people that they're caring for. One of those is in Ezekiel chapter 34. This is a prophecy from Ezekiel. He says this, "Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to those shepherds, thus says the Lord God, woe shepherds of Israel who have been feeding themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? You eat the fat and clothe yourselves with the wool. You slaughter the fat sheep without feeding the flock." Now, also embedded in that where he says you eat the fat actually is supposed to belong to the Lord to begin with. So a corrupted shepherd, meaning a person who is abusing whatever their position is, one, they show selfishness in their nature, and the Lord deals very harshly with people that do that. So the idea here is I don't think that Jude's opponents here were in official leadership positions in the church. But I think what he's getting at here is that when a person takes whatever influence that they have over other people and they use it for selfish reasons, that is the person that God is going to deal with pretty harshly. So the second metaphor is these people that we need to be careful of are people who are shepherds who feed themselves. They abuse their power and position. The next thing he says is that they are clouds without rain, blown along by the wind. Now, I think this is hard to wrap our minds around. We have some benefits that people in the ancient world did not have. Things like this. I can look at what's going to happen on Tuesday of this week and check the weather before I make plans for what's going to happen. Is it going to be raining? Is it not going to be raining? In the ancient world, they were completely flying in the dark at all times. And so there were times where really inclement weather, harsh rain, winds would be completely disastrous to what they were trying to do, or a lack of rain would have been completely disastrous to what they were trying to do. We see this theme appear a bunch of different times in the Bible. One of the really notable ones was when Elijah prophesied that there would be a really long drought where there would not be rain in the land. And so basically what he's saying about these people is that they're like clouds that are teasing like they are going to rain, but they actually don't provide anything. And then they're also blown here and there by the wind. I think what he's getting at here is that people that are like this are people who cannot deliver on what they say they are going to do. Maybe they promise to do something and then they don't do it. Or they project as though they have the ability to do certain things and they really don't. They promise a lot and they don't give a lot. One of our metaphors that we could use is all bark and no bite. Here's another one. One of my favorite ones, this is a Texas one, all hat, no cattle. I love that metaphor about somebody. They're just there to look the part, but they can't actually deliver on what they're saying they're going to do. He says this is what the opponents are like. The other thing he tells us about them is that they are blown along by the wind, meaning that they are easily moved left to right by whatever's going on around them. I think this is actually a pretty important thing for you to be thinking about for people that have influence in your life, whether it is a leader in the church or in your life or at your work or just someone that you know. How much are they affected by the circumstances around them? Are they easily blown and swayed and moved around? This has been an interesting thing for me to watch since I've been in ministry for the last decade plus, is that you see some people that seem on the surface to have a great deal of knowledge and maturity for God's word, but they are blown by the wind so easily. They are so easily dislodged from what they should know is true and right, and then they get blown by whatever the things are going on around them. That's a thing that we certainly want to try and avoid, and we want to avoid that with the people we allow to influence us. The second thing, the next metaphor, is he says they are autumn trees without fruit and uprooted, twice dead. This is a hard metaphor, so I'm going to try and do one thing at a time. Here's the main part of it. He says that they are trees that have made it all the way to the fall and have not produced fruit. So if you look at the life cycle of when trees come, I know in Houston it's kind of weird because it's just hot all year round, so I don't think we have seasons the way that other places do. I grew up in Houston, so I feel like I have a gap in my knowledge about how agriculture is supposed to be. But the idea would be if you have a tree that has not produced fruit by the time that fall has come around, it is not doing what it is intended, what it was created to do. So this goes back to this idea of teleology we were talking about at the beginning. What is a tree designed to do? It's designed to take in sunlight and nutrients and produce fruit. That's what it's made to do. If it gets all the way to the autumn and it hasn't produced anything, it is not doing what it should be doing. So then if you have a person who is a steward of a forest or a garden or whatever place that they have, a wise steward of those things will take that tree that is not producing and they'll do what with it? They'll pull it out. They're either going to prune it or they're going to uproot it and get rid of it entirely. And so he says, one of the things you know about these opponents is that they're like trees who have made it to autumn and have produced no fruit. They are not doing what they were intended to do. I came across a quote about this week. It says, "A tree that is still without fruit in the autumn has not fulfilled its purpose in being." That's true of us. We have a purpose for why we were created. If you are not producing fruit in your life, you are not fulfilling your purpose in existing and what God made you to do. And that's true of any person. We have to look for, is there fruit being produced in the person's life? I do think this is a pretty helpful thing for us to think about, because there are a lot of voices in the world telling you about what you should believe, how you should behave, what you should do, what's going to improve your life. A really easy test to say, should I listen to this person, is what kind of fruit is their life producing? Is their life producing fruit that is in keeping with God's word, that is in keeping with what Christ commands us to do? It's pretty easy when you see a tree that is spouting one thing, but is not producing the fruit that it's saying that it will produce. The next metaphor is he calls them wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame. I have a couple of GIFs here to share with you. So when you go to the ocean, by the way, I can't leave these up long. They're going to distract you. I was telling some people, you guys know this by now, I really enjoy using GIFs like this, moving pictures, when I'm teaching. And this has been the case for me for the last few years. And there was a week that I found an incredible GIF, and it was a part of a lesson I was doing in a Bible study, and it fit perfectly with what we were doing. And basically, it was a cat that was springing up to try and jump off the ledge from one part of a building to another, and he slips as he jumps, and he just falls out the window. You don't see him after that. And so I was in the middle of a lesson. I put up that GIF. I was controlling the slides as I went. And so I start talking, and I get to the most important part of the lesson, like the sentimental part where it's going to take things home. And then I realized no one in the room is looking at me. They're all looking up behind me, and I went, "What's the problem?" And I turned around, and I'd had the cat GIF on repeat for like 20 minutes while I was teaching. Complete mistake. What were we talking about? Okay. So it says they were wild waves of the sea, and they're spewing foam to their shame. And so the idea here is if you've ever been to a part of the ocean where the waves are really crashing around you chaotically, especially if there's rocks around, it spews foam everywhere. It's just in all different directions. And it's saying this is the type of person that is taking what they're saying, the bad fruit of their life and the destruction that they're bringing, and they're just spewing it in all directions. And I wonder if you've seen people do this in your life. I saw a 3-year-old do this earlier today in my household. But you've seen adults behave like this in your life, where they are taking whatever their agenda is, whatever hurts they have in their life, whatever they're angry about, and they are spewing things in all directions, and they don't really care who they hurt, but what they're doing is shameful in the process. Basically, it's showing that they're out of control. They don't have their lives or their tongues in control. The last metaphor he gives in this section is he says that they are wandering stars for whom the blackest darkness has been reserved forever. This is another metaphor that is specific to this time period. If they were out sailing in the ocean in the ancient world, the only way that they could get where they needed to get is that they would need to use the stars to see where they were going. So they would use the constellations and where things were fixed to know which direction they were going and where they needed to be. But there are certain heavenly bodies, things that are in the sky, that do not follow a really easy pattern to detect. So some of those would be the planets in our solar system. So if someone in the ancient world was watching and looking at the sky, they're not going to know that what they're looking at is Venus, that moves in different places depending on what part of the year or which year you're in or which season. And so basically they're saying that these kind of stars are not reliable for telling you where you are going. In fact, there is a lot of ancient Jewish literature that suggested, obviously they didn't know any better at this point, but they said that these moving stars that they're talking about represented angels that were not obeying the Lord, the fallen angels. Now, by the way, that kind of goes in keeping with what we've read in previous verses from Jude. He talks about some of these fallen angels that were not obeying the Lord. But he calls these people wandering stars because they are not reliable. You can't use them to know where you need to go. So here are the metaphors. I'll do them really quickly again, just so we see them before we move on. He says his opponents were like hidden reefs that if you're not watching will sink your boat. They are like shepherds who will not take care of you if you're one of the sheep. They're only going to feed themselves. They're like clouds who are not going to provide water to you, and they're going to be blown around by the wind. They're like autumn trees that will not give you fruit to actually eat, and they'll be dredged up, twice dead. They're wild waves of the sea, spewing foam everywhere, and they are wandering stars that you can't rely on to get you where you need to go. I think Jude might have overdone it with his metaphors a little bit in this little section, but we're not done for tonight, so let's keep reading. Verse 14. It was also about these men that Enoch, in the seventh generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all and to convict all the ungodly of all their ungodly deeds, which they have done in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. I wonder what Jude thinks about these guys. Ungodly, ungodly, ungodly. So Enoch, if you are not familiar, is a guy that's mentioned in the book of Genesis. So in the early parts of Genesis, it starts giving the lineage of Adam onward. And so a few generations after Adam and then through Seth, there was a guy named Enoch. Now, what the text tells us is not much about Enoch, but what it says is fascinating. It says that Enoch walked with the Lord and that the Lord took him up before his time. So it sounds very similar to what happened with Elijah, where he didn't die. God just took him up to be with him. And so the combination of the extraordinary things that Genesis says about Enoch, combined with the relative silence on the rest of what we know about him, it doesn't say much, but what it says is extraordinary. Enoch became a very popular figure in the intertestamental period, so meaning between the Old Testament and Jesus, among the Jews. They were very fascinated with Enoch. And there was a book that was floating around at the time called First Enoch. And it was basically another letter that many of the Jews circulated and read. And at this point, Jude quotes from it. That's what this is, where he says that the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment, to convict the ungodly of their ungodly deeds that they've done in an ungodly way, these ungodly sinners. So the point that Jude here is doing is he's using a text they would have been familiar with to basically say there's precedent that the Lord, and for Jude, this is Jesus, is going to return to cast judgment on those who have been sinners, who have been ungodly. And by the way, this shows up all over the Bible. And I know that we live in an age where it is a little unpopular to talk about something like hell, but the Bible is not shy about talking about hell. In fact, Jesus is not shy in talking about it. It tells us the Lord is going to execute judgment against the ungodly. Jesus says it this way. This is in Matthew chapter 9. He says, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life crippled than having your two hands to go into hell, into the unquenchable fire. And then a few verses later, describing hell, he says, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Jesus is specific, and he even uses metaphorical language to explain what hell is. And so, as a personal preference, if I'm trying to lead someone to the Lord, I want to talk to them about why they were designed to be in line with what God wants for them and the life that the Lord offers and the forgiveness he offered. But there have been a lot of times in history where there are certain people that need to be made aware of the reality. If you keep going the way that you're going, hell is the result. Now, do we know what hell exactly looks like? No, we don't. I think all the imagery that we're given in the Bible is essentially, it's metaphorical language. It's trying to be creative to explain something that we can't understand. But it's important for us to note that it's worth looking at. If you keep going the wrong direction, if you keep moving in an ungodly way, there's only one result to that. And that result is separation from God. It's hell, whatever that looks like in the future. And we shouldn't be shy in talking about that because Jesus wasn't as well. And Jude certainly wasn't. He's gone back there multiple times and talking about his opponents. Now he gives us a few specifics about the people. These are less metaphorical. These are more literal. He said, these are grumblers, finding fault, following after their own lusts. They speak arrogantly, flattering people for the sake of gaining an advantage. So he gives us the specific evil works of these people. One, they grumble. They grumble, meaning when they don't like the way that things are going, they grumble. And by the way, grumbling is not a thing that you just do privately. It's a thing that usually is scattering amongst others. I don't know if I would do it that way. I don't know if they really have our best interest in mind. Trying to undermine other people's trust in what's going on in the church and ultimately grumbling toward the Lord. By the way, we see that grumbling appear a lot in Israel in the Old Testament. And Jude has already referred to that in previous verses, the people grumbling and the unbelievers being judged by the Lord. They find fault easily. They are looking for things to be mad about with other people. By the way, this is a pretty major life skill if you can develop it in your life, and I think it's a spiritual skill to, in your interactions with people, to look for things to affirm in their life instead of looking only for things to find fault with about others. Now, by the way, some of you are just designed to be negative Nancys. Maybe God has designed you that way to have a critical eye, and there's good reasons to have a critical eye sometimes, but you do not want, as a pattern of your life, to be a fault finder. It's easy enough to find faults in other people. It's a little bit harder to find them in yourself. He also says they are following after their lusts, so whatever's going to feel good to them, that's what they're going after. They speak arrogantly, and maybe a more direct translation here wouldn't just be to say they speak arrogantly, it's that they speak bombastically, meaning they over-exaggerate what they're doing. They are using whatever gifts they have with their words to over-exaggerate to cause more damage than they could have otherwise, to be bombastic with the way that they speak. And then lastly, it tells us they flatter others for the purpose of manipulating them, not just encouraging to build them up, but flattering to get what they want. Now, I have thrown, not me, it was Jude, don't get mad at me. He threw a lot of things at you with these verses. So what I want to do very quickly is to look back at these qualities that he has just told us that these opponents have. These people who are not walking with the Lord, they don't accept the lordship of Jesus. He's given us a bunch of metaphors for it. And then what I want to do is then ask, if we were to be the opposite, if we were to actually live what God made us to live, like, what would it look like? What would the life of a godly person look like? So here's what it looks like. It would mean visibly living a godly life. Remember, so he tells them that the metaphor he uses that they were blemishes. They were like a hidden reef. They were not visibly living a godly life. They were making other people fall off the course. You and I were made to live a godly life. Using our influence to serve others, not like the selfish shepherds. Whatever position you have, whatever influence you have over other people, are you using it to serve? A lot of times people have ambition to get a higher position in their work or in life. And a lot of times what is appealing to us about the higher position are the perks, right? I want the bigger office. I want the one in the corner. I want my own bathroom in my office. I still want that. But either way, a lot of times you're pulled to the perks. But the reality of real leadership, godly leadership, is that we are called to serve others. So you use your influence to serve, not for selfish reasons. We would do what we would promise and remain steady. So not being the clouds without rain. If we say we're going to do something, we follow up on it. If we project that we have the ability to do something, it's actually true. Then we produce fruit with the gifts that God has given us, not autumn trees without fruit. I have the conviction here that I believe that God has designed each one of you, each one of us, with the ability to produce fruit with our life, good fruit. And so the lack of production of godly fruit in your life is not a result of you not having the ability. It's the result of whether you're walking with the Lord or not. So we produce good fruit in accordance with whatever our gifts are. Next, we would live under control and bring order to the things that are going on around us. So not like the foaming waves that bring chaos and throw people around. I liked the one GIF I put up there of the guy running away from the wave. It was causing chaos that was going after him. We were made to bring order, not chaos, into the lives of others around us. I think that's a question maybe worth asking on a personal level. In anything that I'm involved with, am I someone who helps bring order to what's happening, or am I causing chaos to the people that are around me? Next, we would be providing stability, reliability, guidance to others. We would not be like stars that are leading other people astray. God has called you to be someone who brings stability to the lives of the other people around you, not chaos. Someone who is reliable, who does what you say that you're going to do. You are someone who follows through with whatever you say that you are going to do. So those are the pictures of what we would look like. And then the opposite of the other things that he tells us afterward would be this. We would be people that encourage others and not grumble. I'm sure that there are things in your life, and I'm sure there are things at our church that you are maybe not are your favorite at times. The question is, when something happens that is not what you want, how do you respond? Do you grumble about it? Do you want to make other people upset about it too? Or are you going to speak encouraging words to others? We would be building up others, not finding fault. We would be self-controlled, not following after our lusts. And lastly, it would mean speaking clearly and truthfully, not arrogantly or manipulatively. Now, there's a lot of things that Jude has thrown out in this passage, but the final thought that I just want to put out is this. There is a clear pattern that would suggest the kind of person that God made you to be. Figuring out who we are and what we should do in the world, it's not a function of saying, what is it that I want to do, and I'm going to go do whatever I want. The truth is, you were designed for a purpose. You were made in God's image, and living up to that purpose means behaving a certain way. It means speaking truth. It means being reliable. It means caring for others and serving others. There's a really clear pattern of what it looks like to be one of God's people and to be conformed into his image. And all of us fall short of that at different times. But when I read a passage like this, I think of that list we just read, about 7 of them, and I won't tell you which 7, were extremely convicting to me. I read those and thought, are there times that people could say, I am like a cloud that doesn't bring water, or I'm like a tree that doesn't bring fruit, or that I'm like a shepherd who is feeding myself instead of feeding the people under my care? I think all of us have to look at that and ask, am I living up to the reality of the purpose that God has given me? Am I meeting the purpose that God has given me? All of us have to ask that. And my prayer for us at our church and for all of us individually is that we would live up to the purpose that God has given to you and to me.